This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on earthquake safety and preparedness. The participants are Professor Surya Prakash, Head of the Geometeorological Risks Management Division at National Institute of Disaster Management, and Gaura Dhawanlal, AIR correspondent. So when we talk of, an earthquake, many visions come, and social media now is full of course, the last one that Delhi felt the repercussions of, mildly in the national capital. Some parts of northern India also felt that. So we have certain conceptions about an earthquake, how to react, how to respond. So in simple terms, if you have to express to a layperson, how would you see an earthquake? What really is one?
I would define earthquakes as natural ground vibrations that gets generated due to few regions, which may be the collision of the different plates on the surface of Earth. The second can be due to volcanic activities. The third can be because of faults and thrusts within the intraplate regions. And the fourth one can be the reservoir-induced seismicity. So these are the four ways by which the ground vibrations get generated naturally and can propagate through the body of the Earth and to the surface of the Earth, affecting the structures and infrastructures which may be overlying the Earth's surface or may be underground structures.
Right. Professor Prakash, when we think that an earthquake has struck and it can strike any time, whether it's the ripples, repercussions, or being at the epicenter, there are also certain guidelines about how to respond, how to react, what should be the first responder. So some things which are actually critical, what are the first responses that should come about when somebody starts feeling the tremors?
When earthquake shaking has been felt by any human being, once you have felt the shaking, you will react to it. Normally there will be a reflex action, but we will often suggest don't go for reflex action, but respond to that situation. Respond to that situation means you assess what is the degree of the shaking. Is it likely to result into collapse of a building or only a crack or just a shaking of the structure? So in case the building is located on a safer ground with adequate foundation and earthquake resistant design, the building may not collapse. Nowadays we have a national building code which is giving adequate guidelines for earthquake resistant design and construction, and also we have special code 1893 of Bureau of Indian Standards which also guides us in earthquake resistant construction. But there are several buildings which are not owned by us or constructed by us, and we are living in those buildings or going to those areas. We are not sure about the quality of the construction. That time one has to take a caution. One, that most of the casualties which have been reported in earthquake are because of the collapse of the buildings and the head injuries which result into casualties.
Okay.
So first thing we always prescribe is protect your head when there is an earthquake. And this you can do either we can do the exercise what we do in normally school is drop, cover and hold exercise, going underneath a table or a chair or something very firm which will actually avoid the direct impact of the falling objects on your head.
Right.
Another is that if you are driving, then what do? Most often there is a likelihood a bridge or a flyover can collapse. So one should try to stop before any bridge or flyover and take the vehicle to one side and then stay there.
Professor Prakash, when people are purchasing a new real estate or they're going in for homes and it's your life's earnings that you're putting into that one house, what should they check with in the building which is there to keep it earthquake safe? At that, because our population density in urban areas where you have taller buildings, where you have more concrete and rubble, is slowly increasing over time. So what do you think are certain precautions that should be taken on a regular measure to ensure that, the after effects can be mitigated, and how can our buildings become safer?
Very good question. In fact, I would start with the location of the building. Say, if you are building your own house and spending a whole life's earnings,
right,
we should buy a plot into an area which should suffer least from the impacts of an earthquake. For example, the areas which are located on the massive rock systems, they don't easily fail. They are very strong and the earthquake waves will pass very quickly and without any amplification. But on the other hand, for example, in Delhi, we have the ridge area where the earthquake impacts may be less compared to the alluvial plains of the Yamuna, where the soil particles, they are not too closely associated and strong cohesiveness compared to the rocky materials. So in the alluvial silts and soils, liquefaction can happen and buildings can subside or can get damaged. So these depends first on the location where the building is being affected. That's first point one has to take care.
Right.
It should be in the safer foundations of the grounds.
Okay.
Then the foundation and the superstructure. Now the superstructure should be well integrated with the ground. So all kind of recommendations which are done through the earthquake resistant design code, I told you 1893, as well as the National Building Code must be strictly adhered to. You can get a copy of the design which has been implemented from the builder and then see whether he has actually carried out those measures for earthquake resistant design and construction. Some of the very simplistic, non-expensive measures which just don't require any additional money also. They are not even followed in many of the construction practices. Basically, when we are designing any buildings, concept is making it a unity structure rather than disintegrated structure. So we follow the different levels of beams at the plinth level, at the door or window levels, and at the roof levels. And also similarly the column structures to be well placed and integrated with the beams to transfer all kind of loads during the earthquakes.
Professor Prakash, when we talk of, today there's a lot of talk of changing climate patterns and climate change and global warming. Do you think that's having an effect on earthquakes? Is there a change in pattern that you see?
Direct relationship, it's difficult to decipher because most of these earthquakes are because of geodynamic processes.
Okay.
Which are endogenic in nature, occur within the earth, except the reservoir-induced seismicity, which is because of formulation. Or maybe sometimes there can be a nuclear fission or some kind of explosive use, which can also result into vibrations within the ground, right? But they are not natural. As far as the climate change relationships with the earthquakes, the changing climatic conditions, they can make the situations adverse due to extreme weather events when the earthquakes strike. I can cite one case. For example, I remember the case when the Sikkim earthquake took place. It was a Sunday evening around, 6 p.m. or 6:30 p.m. On 18th September 2011, when earthquake happened in Sikkim. And this earthquake actually caused a lot of damage. Along with the damage to the building, it resulted into many landslides. The weather was also quite rainy and it was difficult to actually operate or rescue people because of bad weather. So that can be one of the relations you can infer. But otherwise, these seem to be two independent processes. One are the atmospheric processes. Climate change is related to atmospheric changes or oceanic changes and changes between ocean and land environments. Whereas the earthquakes are mostly related to endogenic processes within the earth. Right. Maybe in the upper part, lithosphere or the asthenosphere, and the upper mantle part or inner parts of the earth.
Right.
Earthquake can get generated up to 700 kilometers within the earth.
Professor Prakash, coming back to how do we make sure that we are well prepared? What are the nodal resources one should look at to know more about earthquake disasters? Helpline numbers that we should have? The survivors or the families of people who are affected, they can call for any such information in India?
Yes, we now have actually disaster management authorities, disaster response forces at almost all the levels. And we have a number called 112, which is a number of our common alerts meant for all the four kind of services: police, fire, ambulance, and disaster management. Our emergency operation centers earlier also had a number called 1077 at the district level and 1070 at the state and the national levels. So the disaster management authorities, the National Disaster Authority has issued national guidelines on management of earthquakes, and we have a National Center for Seismology which is regularly monitoring the activities of the earthquakes, and you can get actual reliable information from their website called it is seismo.gov.in, and they have a mobile app also, Bhukam, from which you will be able to get exact information where the actual earthquake has happened at what depth and what magnitude. And also, the National Institute of Disaster Management provides the safety tips. If you look into the NIDM website, nidm.gov.in. And for the response from the national level, we have ndrf.gov.in. You can get the contact numbers of all the battalions. We have 16 battalions in place for response to disaster situations. Then you can download even the copy of our guidelines, which are talking about earthquake risk mitigation projects, capacity development and other activities from ndma.gov.in. So our national policy on disaster management and all others, they can be found there. Okay. So the Disaster Management Act 2005 has actually provided all the mechanisms and provisions for taking care of all kinds of potential, existing and emerging disasters.
So moving from how can we be prepared to how do we handle a post-earthquake situation in terms of rehabilitation, in terms of, improving our response facilities. What are the steps that we have really taken to move forward? Because we have actually, if you go back a few years and see where we are now, I think we've really moved up in this area.
I remember the first earthquake I personally dealt with was the earthquake which struck Uttarkashi on 20th October 1991. And there was hardly much preparedness at that time. And it was really difficult to even carry out the damage assessment of the buildings which were affected by the earth. And talking about the rehabilitation structures, we had to design different types of rehabilitation structures. There were two, Kedar Kuti and Gori Kuti at that time. But now we have progressed quite well after the Disaster Management Act 2005. Now we are thinking of all the phases of disaster management, pre, during and post, with all kind of actions, evacuation, search and rescue, relief, even rehabilitation, as well as recovery act. So not only the physical, even livelihood and psychosocial rehabilitation as well. So now we have good examples. The best example is quoted from Gujarat after the 2001 earthquake, the best recovery project which was ever done by any particular state. So there are good examples where we have done well and we are progressing, and our aim is to go for resilient infrastructure and disaster-free or resilient country. So that's where we are trying to move forward. And we have actually a Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which was launched on 18th March. There was Third World Conference on disaster risk reduction from 14th to 18th March 2015 at Sendai, which was affected by tsunami in Japan. And we are following it from 2015 to 2030. And we have 4 priority actions very well defined globally with discussions by more than 6,000 top delegates and around 200 countries. And we had set 7 targets under the Sendai framework. So the steps are now well and better defined than before. And even the United Nations also has a disaster risk reduction office. We have a global platform now. Just on 10th and 11th, we had the national platform meeting, the 3rd session, which was inaugurated by none other than the Honorable Prime Minister himself. He has also given us 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction. So there are enough of now frameworks and guidelines, both at the international level, be it the Sustainable Development Goal, climate adaptation, or the financing for disaster risk reduction, and also urbanization agenda. So many things now are in place. But the best thing is, which is listed in our policy, to build a culture of risk assessment, prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response and recovery.
Right. I think very well encapsulated towards the end, Professor Surya Prakash. Our conversation with you has left us on a stronger footing, and we are definitely less shaky about understanding what an earthquake can do and stronger about what we can do to mitigate it and also be more prepared. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us.
Thank you, Gauraji.
You were listening to a discussion on earthquake safety and preparedness. The participants were Professor Surya Prakash, Head of the Geometeorological Risks Management Division at National Institute of Disaster Management, and Gaura Dhawanlal, AIR Correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.